Thank you for tuning in to the World Builders Anvil, episode 274. What a revolting development.
Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now, it's time to heat up the forge.
Break out the mithril ingots and hammer.
Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the muck of Java and build. Welcome back. Stricken with the stomach boys. I'm Michael Ingram.
Chewing it back. I'm Jeffrey Miller.
Yes,
stealing my name is revolting.
Yeah, is revolting. I know my wife would be like, "Oh, it's over now, sir."
If you were to steal my name, I would revolt.
You would revolt. I would revolt too because I love my family name, Miller. It's funny. I know two Mike Millers. Very, very, very.
I've met about six.
I only know two really well. It's funny because two gaming buddies.
I went to high school with another one.
Yeah.
They screwed up he was only one grade ahead of me. And actually, had I not stayed back in second grade, we would have been in the same class.
Mm-hmm.
And they did used to occasionally screw up our paperwork.
Excellent.
Or I'd get called to the office for shit he did or something.
Or you're like, Mom, this bad report from school must be for the other Mike Miller. Just sign it for me.
Yeah, just sign it. Yeah. I mean, it just makes it easier at school, Mom.
No, I served with one in the Army, and both of my duty stations, I think he got it a little before me. And so I like it maybe like a month before me, I think. So It's like I went to Germany, hung out, played D&D with this guy, Michael Miller, and then Private Michael Miller. And then when I transferred to Georgia, he had gone to Georgia too. So it was kind of funny. So you're kind of close with your war buddies who play D&D. So even though I made them all play GURPS and Vampire back then. So
So what are we actually talking about? Because we're not talking about vomiting.
No. Of course, we've lost everyone at this point, so we can talk about whatever. But they start hearing the vomiting. They're like, okay, I think there's this
I thought we may want to redo the intro. Some people actually have a bad reaction to those sound effects.
Yeah. They say you're supposed to keep it. What do you call that? Edgy. That's the only way it can be edgy. Making people sick to their stomach.
Even though the subject we're talking about is a very edgy subject.
Yeah, and it's kind of politically because it's something that many countries worry about. Even countries you don't think are worried about it are probably worried about it to a degree.
Yeah, and if you guys haven't guessed yet, we're talking about revolts,
revolutions,
and
rebellions,
rebellion.
And not the difference between those three words because they're basically the same thing. The idea is for some reason there is an attempted overthrow of the established government.
Executing for sedition and sowing the seeds of rebellion.
And one of the things I think we have to talk about first is a lot of times, especially when you go into history books, they talk about the cause of wars, and I think in general, we actually spread out the causes way too much.
What do you mean?
I think we have way too many reasons why things happen.
The way you say that, though, you seem to imply that the reasons that we say are not the actual reasons.
Not usually. The closer they are to us, the less likely they are to be true.
Okay. And it could just simply be a cause of a circumstance of winners writing the history.
Yeah, exactly. And I think so. I think there's a couple different reasons. There are two types of revolts in my mind. Okay. There is a popular uprising, which is really where, for whatever reason, the people rise up against the established government and try and overthrow it. That's usually not the case. They're usually just not organized. There are riots like in France that are probably popular uprisings. Those usually get squashed pretty quickly because the problem is they're not
militarized.
They're not militarized. They're not organized, and they're not ready. Typically, successful rebellions are coups, either through the use of popular uprising, the coup, work to cause a popular uprising, or they will just, in the middle of the night, take out the emperor and establish their guy. So there are a couple different paths there, but I think ultimately there are a couple different reasons where popular uprisings happen, and one is famine. One is drought. One is.
How can let's talk about do you want to list those first?
I'm going to list them and then we can talk about.
Okay, because I got to
tell me what I missed and all that kind of stuff.
All right, keep going. Famine and drought.
Disease. Magical, just because of fantasy, right? Like evil maid.
Sure.
Takes over mass control of people to overthrow the king. Or inflamed is what I call it, that's where the coup people are stoking. And I think like the U.S. Revolution against England is a perfect example of this. I'm not quite a study of the French Revolution. I have a feeling that there was probably a group of people that sort of inflamed that revolution. I think, and then there are coups that, like I said, are not like that at all. But that you also have coups, which I think there's really one reason that coups happen, and that's there's too much power in someone else's hands. Now, sometimes, and it's hard to say because, it's like when someone like Caligula gets killed and you read all of the horrific stuff that Caligula did in history, that's coming from the mouths of the people who killed him.
Right.
So, whether or not Caligula was as bad as he is, and I'm kind of in the camp for Caligula, that he was actually a really good emperor for his first few months. He had a brain fever, which was probably a physical illness, which really screwed with his brain. And between that and coming out and became very paranoid after that and broke down after this illness. Or maybe it was just like a schizophrenic break where, in your 20s, sometimes people can have those kind of breaks as well too. So maybe it was just strictly mental. I don't know. But I think it was some kind of illness, if he acted anywhere close to the way he was described in history. And of course, there were other people like him. Yep.
Was the brain fever a known thing, or is it just what they called it?
That's what it was called, like in historical texts.
Okay.
He had a brain fever. So I don't know. At least I've not heard anyone come up with a good explanation. And most of them say just what I said. It's like it was possibly something physical that caused a mental break, or something that was just purely mental that happened at that time. But he was out for 3 months, so I'd have to think that there was some kind of physical with it.
Let's do a super brief history lesson. For those of you that are not familiar with Caligula, Jeff, do you remember some specific examples of some of the crazy things he did while in power as emperor of the Roman Empire that made people want to overthrow him?
He married his oldest sister after getting her pregnant, which is like in Roman mythology, incest is really bad. And like in the US, most people would be disgusted by brother marrying sister. But like in Roman mythology, like if brothers and sisters gave birth to a child, it would be like a minotaur. It would be something really, really horrific. So not only was it like bad to do, but like it caused really bad problems for everyone. So you didn't do incest unless you are a god, because the gods did all of this stuff, which was ironic. Let's see. He supposedly made or was getting ready to make his horse a senator of Rome.
I thought he did make his horse a senator.
I don't think he did. I think it was one of those things that was like on his plate to do, but once again, we don't even know if that actually even happened.
It's on my to-do list. I just haven't got to this yet. Oh, by the way, make the horse a senator.
Supposedly, he turned one of his palaces into a brothel and insisted that the aristocracy brought their spouses to serve as caregivers, I guess would be the polite way of saying it there.
Concubine might be a little...
to essentially be the prostitutes of there. And this is some of the less disturbing stuff. Like he had an adopted son that he murdered, but that one might have been fair because he might have been involved trying to kill him too. So,
long and the short of it is like there was a lot of reasons that were kind of crazy
Yeah.
that made people question his ability to run the empire.
And I believe too, he was supposed to invade, I think it was either Germany or Britain. I think it was Germany. And he got distracted. He led the Legion to the beaches. And this one could be completely made up. I'm pretty sure this is one of the actual ones. Had the beaches collect seashells. They put them in treasure chests, brought it back to Rome, and held a triumph for defeating Neptune. Battle.
I've never heard that one, but I think that one's awesome. That might be my new favorite.
Yeah, that could just be my imagination playing on things, but I'm pretty sure that was one that I can remember. So, and he was not named Caligula, and it would have been really bad to call him that as emperor.
Really? That was not his name?
No, that was actually a nickname.
Never knew this.
It stood for Little Boots. Little Boots was essentially his father was a well-renowned general and probably would have been emperor, but was killed. And or died. It's one of those that no one knows, but there were accusations that Tiberius had murdered Germanicus, Caligula's father. And but when he was a kid, he was always out in the field in Germany with his father, who would drill him on military tactics, and but he would walk around in a pair of legionary boots. And so the Legion, who loved the father, called his son Little Boots, and it was like a child's nickname for him. And I'm pretty sure it was an adult. I think his name was Gaius Germanicus or something like that. I don't really remember what his real name was, and I'm not going to look it up. So Google it if you want to know. But
the long and the short of it was, I just really wanted you to share with the audience some of the crazy things he did, thus giving
trying to keep on the history lessons.
Just giving those who overthrew him a reason for why.
Mm-hmm. So, but you do have some people who throughout history claim tyranny, and there's usually some truth in that when it's used. But the question is it really the tyranny, or is it ultimately their lack of power that causes it? And I think ultimately it's usually they want more control themselves, and then history will take it from there. So, but those are kind of, like I said, they will sometimes inflame and cause a popular uprising. I don't even know where I heard the stat from, but only about 20 to 30% of the population in the U.S. supported the revolution against England.
20 to 30%, that's it?
Yeah. And then there was maybe about an equal side who were utterly opposed. And then there was a group in the middle that really didn't know. And, but,
wow, so it really could have gone either way.
It really could have gone either way. Wow. And, luckily, like with Benjamin Franklin, there were a lot of really strong propagandists on our side too.
He was a hell of a marketer.
He was a hell of a marketer. And so he really, I think is still underranked in his giving to the war. So even though he's given lots of credit, so they'll claim it's a popular uprising when it's happening as well too. But it's more of a planned thing where they don't have they had no direct access to King George. They couldn't have walked into his chambers and stabbed him in the hallway, or they couldn't have done that. So to overthrow him and take control of the land that they were at, they had to do a popular uprising to do it. And so sometimes, it's forced, or sometimes it's like you attempt a coup with less force, it fails, but you escape, build the army, and come back. That happens a lot as well too.
And if you're unfamiliar with the word coup, COUP, that is simply when a group forcibly takes control
of the state. Yeah, good. The technical name is coup d'état, which is probably pronounced incorrectly, but it's French for I think seize the state. I don't know. Carpe coup. Yeah, that could be. I don't know the exact translation, but the idea is you're taking control of the state. Mm-hmm. As you have a bloodless coup too, which is where you walk in the room like you're going to go to prison, and the guy goes, "Okay, just don't kill me." Those do happen, but those are actually relatively rare.
Yeah. Usually it's a fight, and
usually if it even starts that way, it usually does not end that way.
if you read up on coups, you're gonna find a lot of these smaller nations that have dictators, like violent dictators, and usually that's what's occurring. Is like a warlord will decide he wants to be the dictator, kill the dictator with his guerrillas, and take over the state.
Yeah. So that is the brief of it. About there are lots of reasons you could give. One of my first storytelling tips is, whatever the reason is, outside of famine or drought, it's probably, and when I say famine and drought, it might even just be because enough people can't get access to food, right?
So I want to stop on this for a second. You're not going to cruise through these quickly, are you? Because famine and
That's
drought.
the storytelling tips. Oh, you want to go back? Let's go back. What about famine?
Well, I want to do each of those first. Not a long time, just a second. But like famine. So in cases like this, I assume you've read things that support this, or is this just a concept that you came up with?
Oh, I mean, in most popular uprisings, the ability to deliver food and necessities. And I call it famine and drought here, but it's really food necessities. Being able to deliver those to your family is essential. So like even like the Arab Spring, there was a lot of evidence that because of inflation, the price of food was making middle-class families not being able to feed their family in Egypt and in many Middle Eastern countries.
Okay.
So even though there wasn't a famine or drought in the traditional sense, it was acting as such.
It became an economic drought, so that people could not feed themselves because of that. Okay, I understand, and that would certainly cause, because I was thinking when it said like famine and drought, it's like, okay, well, there's a legit famine or a legit drought going on, which obviously
could very well
be. But my thought is why would they blame the state for a natural disaster?
It's not so much necessarily. Well, one, typically in earlier civilizations, a lot of times you had god kings. When nature turned against a god king, there was a problem with the god king.
Okay.
And religion was always relatively heavily tied. You think there were cults where you would pray to the emperor of Rome, and some people will argue that it wasn't the same thing as like a religious observation to Zeus. It was more like a pledge of allegiance, but it was still, you did it in the same way that you would pray. So a lot of times religion and the state are heavily connected. It's really only a very recent phenomena in the world where some states have become secular or completely secular. Many have been somewhat secular, but still very heavily tied to religion. And it's not even always that you're mad, but the thing is, if the guy in charge, let's say you have a secular state too, right? If there's a guy in charge and you're starving and thirsty, you're going to get desperate and you're going to lash out. And whether that is, go with your friends and start crossing the border and attacking your neighbors for their foods, and that's a form of a revolt where it might not start against the state, but it's out of your desperation that causes it. And a lot of times in these bigger countries, even in countries like England or France, which aren't like huge, like say the Chinese Empire or Russia or Napoleon's Empire.
Well, yeah, I mean,
you'd have regionalized ones, which would lead to regional revolts.
When you hear England or France, you think big country, but physically, these are small nations.
Yeah.
Politically and internationally, like their importance is significant, but England is not large, and neither is France.
And the part of the problem would be too is when the whole country is making a little bit more than they need. If you have a famine or drought, like say in a small region, let's say a county of England, right? They might be in famine and drought for 7 years because of the rain patterns just happen to shift the rain. The rest of the country might be okay, but in that one county, you start to have a buildup of resentment. And ultimately, they'll feel overburdened by any taxation request, which the local lord has to do because he needs the stuff from the people to finance his ability to be a warrior for the king. So ultimately, there's a linking because the landowner gets paid by the people who live on his land, either in a serf or in a rent version for a peasant. They have to pay to be there. So when they can't do the one job that they have, which is agriculture, it's going to lead to at least a local problem. And sometimes those will blow up into bigger problems if not suppressed. And there are countless, if you go into history, countless renditions of peasant revolts in England, some for religious purposes, which probably should have been added to my list, and some for economic reasons. But I have a tendency to think most of the religious revolts had more to do with a political coup being attempted in the background, trying to inflame a certain type of religious group to overthrow who's in charge because they're of a different religious group. So I still kind of think that a religious coup, even though religion is what they're saying their cause is probably still Queen Mary wants to be the Queen of England instead of Queen Elizabeth. So she attempts a revolt and gets killed in a most brutal way. So do you have any more questions on sort of popular uprisings and coups and any of the other ones that you feel you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, it was really just the famine and the drought thing that jumped out at me. But yeah,
because the others I think are very specific, magical. Once again, this could be caused by the gods. This could be caused by a mage who's infesting the minds of people, or raising an undead army. That's really a kind of a revolt, and a very revolting revolt. If I raise an undead army and I have a massive zombies attacking the kingdom, and then I'm raising more people, it's really a form of a revolt if it happens internally, or it's an invasion if it's from the ice wraiths up north. I'm sorry, I don't think they're called ice wraiths. I don't even remember what they're called. That's next week. So now storytelling tips. The most common way I see these stories delivered, you're typically on the side of the revolt, or you're on the side of the loyalists, right? And I think that's short-sighted. I think it's more interesting because I think more people are kind of caught in the middle of these things and really don't like either side, but kind of, they might go along with one of the two sides. They might have to. But I think the more interesting story really is the story of the people who don't feel tied behind the reason of the revolt, but either their lands get caught up in it, or, like where they live gets raided by the peasants revolting. They start to get mad and want maybe revenge on the peasants, even though that maybe their causes weren't that separated. So I think I think the easy story is, and you see this often, this is probably the most common trope in fantasy, is you have a tyrant and you're trying to overthrow a tyrant. That's
right.
I don't know how many times I've seen or video games played that scenario out to victory each and every time.
Did you ever watch the movie The Patriot?
Yes.
Yeah, this very much reminds me of that, where he's very reluctant. He doesn't initially want to be part of the fight.
Mm-hmm.
Like his son wants to get in it, and they're talking about wanting to be a free country, and he's like, why would I trade one tyrant who's 1,000 miles away for 1,000 tyrants 1 mile away?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's like, sure, King George is in charge, but he's all the way on the other side of the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
His influence doesn't have to be that strong here. And so he wasn't for it.
And philosophically, I think we've talked about this a little bit before, is like, if you have like let's say Caligula, what we talked about earlier, was as crazy as we say he is. If you didn't live in the city of Rome, did it even affect you?
Right.
So let's say 100 million people, I'm just guesstimating, that lived in the Roman Empire. Maybe it was 20. I don't know. But of the millions of people, I think around 5 billion people lived in Rome, which was huge if you think about the size of Rome at the time, like landmass wise. There's like 1 to 5 million people who lived there. But outside of, and even for those people there, if you weren't in the palace, how often did it affect you? So, one man's tyrant is another person's,
news.
news. Yeah. And you might even philosophically agree, but philosophically agreeing that someone's bad is still, and I liked in the movie The Patriot that they addressed that. It's still a huge step to go, you know what? I'm going to put my life at risk, my family's livelihood at risk to go fight this person. And that's the thing that people forget about too, is there's a risk when farmers go to war, whether they're peasants or whether that they're like in Rome citizen farmers who are going to war, because if the war lasts too long, your harvest maybe doesn't come in well. You're not there to do the harvest, and all of a sudden you've created a drought where you've lived, or a famine where you live.
Yeah, if your children aren't old enough and know how to do the farming, you might accidentally, really put your family in a bad physically health condition just because you needed to go away for 6 months, a year.
Well, I've seen some arguments too. They talk about in ancient Rome, one of the big reasons the inequity grew so quickly during the late Republic between the rich and the poor was, at the time you had to be a citizen, which means you had to be a landowner, which meant you were probably a farmer. That was your requirement, because you had to buy your equipment to be in the army. And so a lot of times the campaigns were now going over into Asia. They were getting a lot further away. They weren't a seasonal thing anymore. So the farmers would come back, their land would have gone into bankruptcy, and it would have been auctioned off, and one of the senators left behind would have bought up your land. And so you start getting these giant plantations throughout the Italian peninsula, and a bunch of unemployed veteran soldiers left behind, which leads to turmoil in the late Republic, which probably leads to an empire. But think about, how do your characters how do you want them to fit in? And whether this is a campaign or a novel, you need to kind of think about, how do I want them to fit in? Do I want them, directly connected to one of the causes, or do I want them, as the odd man, out? Maybe brought into the war, but maybe not. Maybe the whole point is to not get involved in the war. There are lots of different paths you can go with that, but I think that's an interesting thing that you have to think about, is how do they really fit into the scenario? I like to know who wins. And your story, if it doesn't go there, it might not be important. Like in Game of Thrones, you could continuously do Game of Thrones as stories, because the cycle of the Game of Thrones never end. And so, in theory, it could keep going and going and going, throughout the life of the writer, or now the TV show. So, even though it just becomes too expensive after a while, I guess. So, but, the thing to keep in mind is, as the storyteller, you want to know what's going to happen. And now in video games where there's agency, you might have, if you follow the correct path, you win. If you don't, then maybe you lose, or something in between. But keep in mind that when you have in mind who's going to win, because that's how you're going to control the tension in the story, is by making it difficult for the winner to win from the perspective of the person engaging with it. You don't want it to be easy. You want to make it seem difficult, and then all of a sudden, the climax happens because of a few events that the characters were involved with that pushes it over the top, and you get to plant your flag at the top of the mountain. Or you watch your flag fall, as you flee down the mountain, if that's the way the story goes. But know who wins, and the thing I like to think of too is it going to be better or worse? There are many people who've taken over countries, to free the people, which is a very common thing that is used to inflame people, that you're not free and I'm going to help free you, and then I take over, and sometimes the devil is actually better than the devil you don't know. So it's not always better. For me, though, that's like a trilogy kind of story. You're the story of the revolution, and you're all happy and you win. And then the next story, you realize that the person who you got into power isn't who you thought they were, and are actually maybe worse than the people who were there. And then as the characters, how do you deal with that in the third book? That's sort of the hero's journey, sort of Star Wars. Yay, Star Wars. Oh my God, Empire Strikes Back. Yay, Return of the Jedi.
We'll look at the episodes 1, 2, and 3, where they dissolve the the Senate to make an empire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or dissolve the republic to make an empire. It's like, wait a minute. No, this isn't. This is better. This is better, right? No, not really.
Yeah, and at the time, I mean, sometimes it depends on your. Yeah, maybe you lose freedom, but it's like if you're around in late imperial or late Republic Rome, and there is a new civil war every 10 years, where hundreds of thousands of countrymen get killed, and more people are losing their lands. Sometimes it, at least initially, if you have a good dictator, it can seem a lot better. The problem is, history kind of shows us that sooner or later they're not going to all be good. Statistically, that's probably not going to last for long.
Yeah, give it time.
Even if the country lasts for a long time, you're probably going to have several bad rulers within there, or very few who are actually good at it. So I like to think about how the characters fit in, who wins, who is it better or worse after all, and what's the cost of the victory. I think a good storytelling, you need to make a cost for something. And sometimes it's very little, like in an 80s action movie, the cost is like you've ripped your shirt or something. But there's still you've ripped your very nice shirt. If you're in the Die Hard movies, it's you lose your feet every movie. Your feet have to get damaged every movie. It's just a law of nature.
Did his feet get damaged?
I don't know, but it was so good that's what sticks in my mind.
Gotcha.
Or it's you have to run into snakes if you're Indiana Jones. But sometimes it could be if you're doing serious dramatic stuff, it's gonna be bigger. Like, okay, we've won a very war, but now the land is raised. We got rid of a dictator, and maybe we are better, but what are we gonna do? It's like he burned all the crops of the kingdom. So you can get into some really serious things. Like, even if morally the rebellion was suited, if when they take over, the land is in a horrible position, how does that go? And maybe that bad guy tries to come back later on and says, look how bad it is under these new people. You were better off under me. So you can face the same foe twice in two different stories because the cost of victory was so high. And oftentimes, look at World War II. The cost of victory of World War II was extraordinarily high. Now I would argue it's much lower than the cost of losing the war. But, sometimes in wars, it's cloudy if that's even true or not. Like I said, if you're a peasant in medieval England and the Normans take over, is your life really any better or worse?
As long as they don't kill you.
Yeah. As long as you don't get killed in the invasion, it's probably not going to seem that much different. It could, and there's definitely going to be isolated wars. And there's always an aversion if the culture is different. But over time that fades, and you get blended culture. So the Normans and Anglo-Saxons become the English, which is really ironic because it's the Northmen actually did win the war if you think about it. That's a different story. And then what's the reward, and what's that shining thing that got grasped? Because victory and sometimes defeat, there are rewards in. So what is the victory on the backside for the characters? And I think this one gets forgotten. We like to overdark things.
Does there always have to be a reward? Could it also be a negative consequence or punishment?
It could. Well, I'm saying you should have.
Or do you mean as a motivation?
I'm saying you at the end. I think you should end these things with punishments and rewards, both. And you're going to choose how severe or minor they are. But maybe sometimes being dead is better than living under the tyrant. So you lose, but you
dead is better.
And that's a very dark reward. But maybe that's the moral of the story. Maybe he didn't get to torture you. Maybe it's Braveheart and okay, you've defeated and killed me, but your next king will be my son. So sometimes there's a hidden reward like that too. They don't have to be big. They don't have to be obvious, but it adds. Life is messy. And storytelling that isn't a little messy, I think that's where people say it doesn't feel real, because life is so messy that if you don't have a little bit of mess in your story, it doesn't feel right. But if you have too much mess, then I think you lose the audience too, because then it's like, oh, this isn't realistic, even though it could be a true life story being retold in fiction.
I think it also depends on delivery too, though, because there are definitely hardship stories out there that are insanely
it's always about the delivery.
Yeah.
Tips don't get you there. It's the execution. And ultimately that's the thing, is just write it until it gets the emotion that you want from people. And then you know it's ready. And so that's really it for this episode. Just I don't even know why this topic got in my mind. I was at a mastermind all week, and lots of talking back and forth. So my brain's kind of burned out. I don't know if my brain getting burned out leads me to the thought of revolution. Maybe it was coming home, and my son, by the end of the week, because my wife and I were both leaving and we're gone all day. And sometimes he wouldn't see us before he went to bed. Like Friday, he would not get out of his mom's arms. Anytime, like we would just even walk outside to take out garbage, he would start to cry. Even though he had a great time with his grandmother at our house, it was the fact that he knew we were leaving. And he had his own little mini revolt mixed in there. So that brings us up to the world-building task of the day.
World-building task of the day: write a small revolt, write a small rebellion, or create the character that's going to sow the seeds of dissension.
Sow the seeds of dissension. Oh, how very...
Kill him. Real world task is also I'm taking them both.
Okay.
Real world task is also a minor world building task, but can be fun. Grab your partner, your friend, your buddy, your world building writing partner, or whoever you got, and watch some rebellious movies, because they're all so much fun. The Patriot, if you want to watch a serious one and really pay attention to how some of the things work out in there. Star Wars, pseudo serious. How about a not realistic? How about a totally not serious one? Can you think about like a
History of the World Part 1? The French Revolution.
Oh, okay, yeah. All right, I forgot.
One of the segments is the French Revolution.
Yeah, that's true. I love the peasants. Oh,
draw.
Oh.
We won't step on that punchline in case you haven't seen it. You really should see that. And there are all kinds of making fun of history in that movie. And no, there's not a part 2. Unfortunately.
Was there supposed to be? There's certainly,
I don't know.
The world would welcome it.
The world would have welcomed it. I know that Mel Brooks wanted to do a Spaceballs Part 2, but could not get Rick Moranis for it.
Do you know why Rick Moranis retired?
I think it was just one of those things where he was maybe too popular.
No, that's not it at all.
No, what's it?
His wife passed, and he wanted to raise his kids. There's actually talk about him coming back to acting now because his kids
are older.
Are older now.
Wow, that's huge props.
Yeah, sad for us, because how many more amazing Rick Moranis,
No Spaceballs Part 2. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're actually still that's been
thrown out there.
Yeah, that's right. They're also, how Ghostbusters 3 is coming. They're talking about trying to get Rick Moranis.
Are they going to? Yeah, but they got rid of the. But I guess they've reused them in different ways or whatever. Because
what do you mean?
I thought the new Ghostbusters wasn't based off of the original. Are you talking about a part 3 for the original?
I'm talking about Jason Reitman, Ivan Reitman, the original writer-director of Ghostbusters. This is his son, and he is a very accomplished filmmaker, director in his own right.
Okay.
And he has said previously he never wanted to do something like this. Well, he put out I'm surprised you haven't seen it, a little trailer, a little teaser trailer, teasing that they're going to do a Ghostbusters 3.
Yeah, because the last I heard of Ghostbusters was when they rebooted it, which I've not seen. The ads were not appealing. It did not look like it captured the heart.
I don't think, and it was not super well received. I have never seen it. I heard there were aspects of it that were very good. Like apparently Chris Hemsworth was fantastic in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I usually ignore the way people receive stuff. For me, when you read just like Ghostbusters, I need to see the heart of the original one. You can play with the rest of it, but the ads didn't do a good job of selling me that the heart was still there, which was a comedy / horror.
Yes, I agree.
And so to me at that point, I'm not interested. I just have too many other things I have to do. So speaking of which, we will see you all next week.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.gardul.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.